Hello, I'm Kaine Riggan with the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, and I am here today to talk to you about how to write a winning HMGP infrastructure application. You've probably already received your email from us guiding you to the second phase of the process in the application period, and this video is going to help you to make it to the finish line. So let's get started. Of course, if you haven't done so already, we want you to start by taking a look at our webpage at ncdps.gov/HMGP. That's where you're going to find any updated deadlines, the full guidelines for the application, the scoring criteria, many of the things that we're going to talk about in today's video, as well as any clarification for something that may not be included in the video. So if you're joining us today, you were one of the 326 LOIs submitted by May the 30th of 2025. Those were reviewed and a response was received sometime in June or July about whether we thought your project was eligible to advance in this grant program. And then the leadership took a look at that spreadsheet of the advancing applications and gave the final nod for those. And we are sending those emails out here at the end of August. So if you haven't received one from us, do reach out and make sure that your application is advancing. The four main tracks of advancing under HMGP infrastructure is number one, advance assistance. That is a rolling grant deadline that goes through December the 1st. The second, which we're going to spend most of our time in this webinar talking about, is the HMGP infrastructure construction application. The majority of this will be devoted to that, with a little bit of discussion about the 7% planning and 5% initiative tracks. You would have been notified after your LOI was submitted if your application was really more appropriate for 7% or 5% initiative. So do take a look at that email and be familiar with both of those application tracks if that's how you're advancing. Most of today's information is going to be geared towards the infrastructure construction application. After August the 15th, all submissions must be through the Salesforce portal, and I'm going to talk to you about how to do that here in just a moment. Here's that all-important grant timeline for developing your application, starting with that initial email that came out here at the end of August that gave you the final nod in moving forward to the next step of the application process. Then August 29th is when we posted this grant webinar and some other helpful information on our website to get you started in making it through to that first draft. October 6th, speaking of first draft, is when that first draft of your application is due. Then the 13th through the 15th, we're going to put it through a statewide peer prioritization panel that's going to score it using the scoring criteria that is shared with you in the guidelines on the website. November the 17th through the 19th, you'll notice there's about a month in there that we're going to go through all of our state approval and review processes and make sure that what you are submitting is actually going to be eligible in the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program for a construction project or one of those other tracks that we were talking about. And we'll reach back out to you, set some meetings up with you the 17th through the 19th to talk to you about the findings of that panel and how you might better your application in those final few weeks, and talk to you about some additional information that may be required, which is what we call an RFI, a request for information. The final draft of the sub-application, note this, if you're working with a consultant or someone who's doing your final application, is going to be due December the 15th, 2025. Now, your advance assistance application has an open and running deadline all the way through December 1st. What are we talking about there? You may be familiar with other federal grant programs and perhaps even BRIC through this section. Those allowed for phased projects. We are not advancing phased projects. We're looking for shovel-ready construction, or we're looking for you to submit an advance assistance application, which provides all of that phase one pre-construction activity that is required for you to have a shovel-ready project to submit in a future round, or if we're lucky, maybe even this round of grant funding. It starts with your project scope. It has to be specific future mitigation project related. It cannot be general studies. If it was a general study, we would have passed you off to one of those other tracks that I talked to you about and will talk to you about here in a moment. It has to include your deliverables, which includes the BCA, the cost estimates, the feasibility that you already know about the project, and the timeline. Now, one thing that I want to point out that may be different from what we were originally sharing with you, we were originally only looking for advanced assistance applications that could provide those deliverables before the end of the 4827 application window. That is no longer the case. Actually, that POP deadline is the same as the full construction applications for an advanced assistance application. So you've got a long window there. And we want you to move as swiftly as possible in getting those deliveries or those deliverables done in time. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could get those done in time to submit those in this same grant period? Those are the real winners here if you're able to pull that off. But if not, the goal is to have it done in 48 months, which is putting it at about December 28th, 2029. And before I move on there, I just want to talk to you about the fact that the budget needs to include all of those items, including one of the things that's missing from a lot of these advanced assistance applications that we've received so far is your BCA. Please don't submit an advanced assistance application without the full development of a BCA included in that budget, because that's going to be needed to submit your shovel-ready project in this or a future round. Here are the 6 standalone attachments that we would like you to submit in your full infrastructure construction application. Starting with the BCA. The BCA, both of those are in green. One is your Excel file of the BCA toolkit. The other is the PDF printout and all of the supporting materials that goes along with a benefit cost analysis. Note that the 5% and the 7% paths here do not have to have a benefit cost analysis submitted with the application, although your 5% does still need to have a BCA methodology, which is where you're going to provide a narrative for how that project is indeed cost effective, which includes a lot of the same information that you would have put in a more formal BCA tool. We want you to provide specific naming conventions for these 6 standalone attachments. Look, this grant application is not question and answer inside of a grant intake portal. It is 6 standalone attachments that you're going to upload to our Salesforce portal. So name them in a way that is easy for us to recognize when we download those to A, send them off to a statewide review panel, and B, send them off to FEMA. And these are those naming conventions we would like for you to use for the 6 attachments. Of course, DR 4827 at the middle, and then your subapplicant name, whether it's the town or the county, and then those handles that you see there, whether it's a PDF or an XLS file. We've purposely designed this so that you can go ahead and be working on your application ahead of getting into the Salesforce portal. But once you do get into the Salesforce portal, this is what you're going to be looking at, and where specifically we need you to upload each one of those specific attachments. First of all, starting with the BCA methodology, that's going to go under your upload maps. This is a direct screenshot from what the inside of the Salesforce portal looks like, and I'll just go ahead and bring them all in so that you can do a screenshot and know exactly where your 6 applications are going. Noting at the bottom right, those allow you to upload other files, and you're going to call those budget and the timeline in the drop-down box that allows you to give those a title. Now, all of the advancing sub-applicants that I'm aware of fall under 2 scenarios. One is if you've already submitted your LOI slides in the grant portal in Salesforce. If that's the case, all you'll need to do is go back to that portal, and we have that linked on our website. And click on the My LOIs tab, which is going to pull up all of your either submitted or approved or just draft applications that you're working on in that portal. You'll go to the one that is submitted there and edit that LOI. You're submitting this in the same way that you submitted your LOI in Salesforce. There's two different tracks inside of the Salesforce portal. One is the details and the other is the LOI files. We'll start with the details, and you're going to click on update my letter of interest, that button that I'm showing you right there. That's going to pull up this screen. Remember to use that toggle up and down there. I notice sometimes I get calls from people who are saying, I can't find where to put the budget. You've got to toggle down in one of those screens in order to find a place to put the budget. So remember to do that up and down and save and next on each screen. Remember, you do have the ability to edit any of that information. You're not glued to anything that you submitted in the original LOI in the way of budget or title or anything like that. In fact, I'll talk specifically to the title here in just a moment. The first scenario, of course, also lets you do those LOI slide files just like you would be able to do in the second scenario, where you're going to go and upload each one of the 6 required attachments in the places that we told you to. In the Salesforce video that is also available on our website, it talks about how you can advance and submit your application without 5 of those 6 attachments. Remembering, of course, that the 5% and the 7% track only is going to have 5 attachments because it doesn't have to have the budget. Or it doesn't have to have the BCA. The 7% also does not have to have the BCA methodology, so that one's only going to have 5 attachments. The second scenario is if you submitted your LOI by email and you did not submit it through the Salesforce portal. So what you're doing there is sort of backtracking, which is fine, and setting up your Salesforce and submitting all of your information in the Salesforce portal. You'll go to our website, and the link will be there along with step-by-step instructions about how to set up that, including a short video about how to set up your Salesforce account. And then remembering to follow those instructions on our website. You have to email Steve Jackson to complete that task, but that should be a pretty quick process for you. Then follow the instructions just like everyone else in scenario 1. So you only have one added task, and that is to set up your Salesforce account, and we've got all of that at ncdps.gov/HMGP. Now, in a high volume situation like this one, there's a lot of times when the leadership is really looking at a spreadsheet of titles to your grant application, and a poor title is going to raise more questions. So let's be sure that the title that you're advancing with says that it is eligible for an HMGP infrastructure application and does not raise questions about whether it is the deferred maintenance that we are so trying to avoid in these grant applications. That is the number one thing that will get your project booted, is if it reads more like maintenance than mitigation. So let's avoid words like those that I've included on this slide here. Moving on to the all-important benefit cost analysis, there's no coincidence here that we have made this attachment 1. It is the most important part of your application. And for these next few slides, I want to give credit where credit is due to the state of California and CalEOS. I sat through all of their training webinars, and they were very helpful in gathering this information for you. And I've used some of their slides here that very succinctly showed you how to navigate the BCA tool to get what you need. So just take a look at step number 1, step number 2 on the website there on how to download the benefit cost analysis tool, the BCA 6.0. You're going to need that, whether it's you or your consultants. This is guiding you screen by screen how to capture that BCA tool and the all-important add-on that is available and easily accessible that you'll need in your Excel in order to be able to do that. Downloading the Excel file of your BCA is quite simple. However, to navigate to the PDF version, which is what you're going to need to include as the first part of your BCA methodology, that takes just a little bit more work, and you can follow the path of the red arrows and boxes here to get where you need to go. The PDF report will be included, as I said, as the beginning of your BCA methodology. Be sure to note FEMA's recent changes to the 7% discount and the social benefits that are allowed in the BCA tool. You're not going to be able to cookie cutter use a BCA that you may have provided for a previous round or for BRIC. For this, you're going to need to rework that BCA based on the new restrictions. See the HMGP guidelines for more BCA tips. Remembering that it's very technical, so you need to work with a infrastructure experienced consultant to get that benefit cost analysis across the finish line. If you do need some help directly from FEMA, you can check out the helpline information that is located at the bottom of that slide. However, you'll be delighted to know that the BCA is not actually due at the first draft of the application. If you go back and take a look at the timeline, it's not that first draft. It's not those steps in which those are going to be due. It's not until December 15th when the final draft is due that we need to have your benefit cost analysis in the Salesforce portal. Now, while the state does not provide technical assistance for your benefit cost analysis development, we do provide some really great support material, starting with the winning BCAs from the first 4 years of BRIC infrastructure funding, reminding you that every input must have evidence or assumption narrative. So everything that you enter into that calculator, that's what they get usually booted, or in this case, RFIs for, is you didn't provide assumption narrative or data to support every input. And so to flag that you have done that, we want you to start your BCA methodology with something called an Input Documentation Log. And that log should look somewhat like this. Of course, you're welcome to make it look even better than this, but this shows you sort of all of the suggestions for what some of your inputs might be in a common infrastructure BCA, and shows you how you might provide sources, the dates of those sources, and specific page numbers in that BCA methodology for what supported that input. Every number in the BCA calculator must have a specific document like an invoice or a study or an engineering report that supports that being used in the calculator. You just can't put a number in, even when it seems inconsequential. The hazard type is consequential, and we need to know why you are a source for why you are using that particular hazard type for your project. And in addition to that BCA methodology, we really want you to use the input justification boxes that are available in the BCA tool to put further explanation about those inputs. So you're recording it in two places, in your BCA methodology and in the justification box that's available inside the BCA tool. In fact, those winning NTR notes, the National Technical Review notes that I'm talking about, that we're going to provide the link for you, provide a really nice summary of the scope of work as it relates to evaluating the calculator inputs. Do the same for your application. Do take a look at those NTR notes. They're very helpful in helping you to understand what's expected in this BCA methodology. That methodology is a narrative document designed to guide that single FEMA contracted reviewer through the data sources, assumptions, and calculations that support each input entered into the BCA toolkit. That is the purpose of this BCA methodology. So it's going to have your PDF output in the beginning, and then it's going to go line by line and show the data that you used. And so what I'm providing you with here in each one of these additional attachments is an outline that's going to just suggest how you might design your attachment. You can do it in a different way if you'd like, but try to stick to the outline, because the outline is tied to the scoring criteria, and that's what our state reviewers are going to be looking for in scoring your application to decide whether it's going to be submitted to FEMA at the end of the year. Now, I'm going to be moving pretty fast to keep this webinar short on each one of these slides, but at the end of each section, at the end of each attachment, there's going to be an outline, a single screen that you can do a screenshot of, that's going to have that suggested outline for each one of the attachments in your application. Starting with your very brief project summary. Tell your story in just a couple of paragraphs. What are you mitigating here? What hazard is the risk? What is the project? What are the outcomes of the application? Then moving right into your input documentation log. That's what we just went over just a moment ago with those headings there. Then your hazard identification, you're going to identify the hazard type, the data sources that are involved in that benefit cost analysis, and the recurrence intervals applied, that is, or the recurrence interval, which is, of course, also important to the benefit cost analysis. The historical data, what past hazard events are you using? Remember to focus in all narrative items on disaster related damages rather than just your every time it rains. Not that you can't use that in your benefit cost analysis numbers, but in speaking about your project, you want to focus on disaster damages that you have had. That's coming directly from our state hazard mitigation officer. And then the method of escalation to present day dollars. You'll talk about that, and the person who's doing your benefit cost analysis will be quite familiar with what FEMA is looking for there. Your service area, your customers, your residents served, your estimated outage duration, the benefit categories that you have used there. Talk specifically about the rationale for the inclusion or exclusion of benefit streams. And of course, don't overlook those indirect benefits that are available to you to be quantified in your benefit cost analysis. The cost basis, you're going to talk about the engineering opinion of probable cost, your EOPC. You're going to identify any pre-award costs. Let me say that again. Hello. Your pre-award costs, they must be so emphasized in your application if you expect to be able to be reimbursed for any of those. Take every opportunity to identify them in the budget, in the BCA methodology, in your cost narrative. Wave every flag because they have to be identified in both the application and in the award letter that comes from FEMA later. Limitations and conservative approach, if that is a factor here, you want to acknowledge those. FEMA likes to see that you have considered. We used median repair costs from the past 3 events instead of the maximum. That they want you to be as conservative as possible and still have a BCA greater than 1. And then all things that tie back to this BCA. I know this document can get a bit heavy, but it should be. If you can trim things down, if you're using as a data source a report, for instance, that's 200 pages long, please just include the cover page and the 2 pages that talk specifically and support your project. Don't put that entire study in here. Take the time to make that a little more friendly to the reader. And here is screenshot opportunity number 1, the outline for your BCA methodology. At the end of this entire webinar, I'm going to go through and just quietly provide you with these outlines once again. Moving on to attachment 3, the scope of work attachment. This is your anchor document for understanding exactly what will be built, where, how, and why. And it needs to read like a construction contract summary, not a planning exercise. The tone, think about that. The scope of work must read as a shovel-ready construction project, not a study or future determination. If that's the case, it shouldn't be in this particular grant track. If the application lacks a clearly defined hazard mitigation action, FEMA will consider it incomplete or will reclassify it under planning or advanced assistance. If you're lucky, they might just boot the thing. So work with me and talk to me about making sure that you've got a shovel-ready construction project. And of course, there's different interpretations of what shovel-ready means, and I can help you to make sure that you are shovel-ready in moving forward for the full application. If we missed something in those 2 slides that you submitted, that's minimal information. It's likely that we could have missed something that you were missing or something that might deem you as ineligible. Please set up a call with me. It's so easy to do. That at the end of every single one of my emails, there's a link for click to schedule an infrastructure development call. You can click that and I'll be available. I'll jump on a call and answer your questions and make sure you're not wasting time on an application that's not going to be eligible for advancement. Now, I'm not going to read this executive summary slide to you, but I also provided this in the email that we sent out at the end of August. Make sure that you can fill in the blanks and make this a solid sentence. This is your elevator speech for the director, for how this project is advancing in this application. Use that word for word and drop your information in there. And if you don't have a clear fit for answering that particular blank, reach out to me, because that is a red flag that might indicate some sort of ineligibility. Now, don't skate through your problem statement. This is a point heavy section. There's a lot of points that are going to be derived from this section of your application. So talk about what specific hazards threaten the specific infrastructure that you are mitigating here. How often does it occur? You're also going to be very helpful if you frame the project as true hazard mitigation instead of routine maintenance. That's the question these guys are going to have. And ladies, isn't this maintenance? Are we mitigating something here? Sell it, focus on it, and tell that story in your problem statement. You must have a documented history of damages. You must have a documented history of damages. What past hazard events have you been dealing with in this project area? Talk about the vulnerability and risk. What makes the facility especially vulnerable? Is there a recurring point of failure? Talk about the community impacted, how many people and customers are affected by it. Address the elephant in the room. Talk about why routine maintenance is not enough to solve your problem here. Specifically, link this scope of work back to a specific mitigation action in your FEMA approved regional hazard mitigation plan. Reach out to me if you have not made that clear link, because that is a key eligibility item. And we can set up an appointment with you, with our planning team, to make sure that that tie-in already exists, or make an amendment to your current plan so that it does tie back. Moving on now from that all-important problem statement, you're going to go into the project overview, which doesn't need to be particularly long, but you're going to talk about the facility and infrastructure that is at risk, the hazard being mitigated, and the expected mitigation outcome. Talk specifically about how, again, this is not routine maintenance, but hazard mitigation. Number 4 is your location and site description. Don't forget that first bullet there that talks about your staging area. That comes back in the RFIs a lot, that they want you to have talked about and considered the staging for your project, and provide exact coordinates for where that construction activity is going to be staged. And then, of course, your detailed scope of work. This is a sequential list of your construction and pre-construction tasks with enough detail for FEMA to understand the deliverables, and then, of course, the state to be able to put those deliverables into a grant award, grant agreement, once this has all been approved by FEMA. You want to identify who is responsible for every single one of those tasks. You are looking to inspire confidence that this project can be pulled off at the local level. Then you want to include a section that speaks specifically to your technical specifications. This might be written by the actual engineer that has worked on this design. This is another opportunity for you to point out that this is not maintenance, but mitigation in a very technical way, and include your alternatives considered in this section. FEMA does expect at least one feasible action alternative in addition to the no action alternative, which is the low-hanging fruit. Number 7 is your operations, maintenance, and monitoring section of your outline. You're going to speak specifically to who's responsible for this being operated and maintained after completion. And then number 8, that all-important deliverables list, that you're going to go line by line on what completed actually looks like, so that we know how to close out your grant application. Be sure to include clear criteria for how completion will be demonstrated and verified. Each deliverable should be explicitly linked to a milestone in the schedule and implementation measures attachment, which we'll go into here in just a moment. Reference those supporting attachments like the engineering report. This demonstrates internal consistency across the application, which is important. Maybe you want to use a chart to do this. We leave that flexibility open for you in designing this, but we want you to state who is responsible for producing each deliverable in this scope of work. And here is all of that laid out in 8 points for you: the scope of work, attachment, outline. And now that we're halfway through these attachments, I'd like to take just a little intermission here to make some general notes about all 6 of the attachments, particularly 5 of the 6 of them. What you're doing is 2 jobs at once. You're providing FEMA with the technical documentation that they require, and you're presenting it in a reader-friendly, scoreable way that makes it easy for reviewers to see the points. Make sure that those state reviewers can easily find that you've addressed each one of the items in the scoring criteria. Break up dense text with visuals. Use tables and flow charts and graphics whenever it's possible to do it in a very visually friendly way. Highlight the scoring criteria. If the scoring guidance, for instance, says community engagement earns 5 points, then wave that flag at community engagement by using bold headings when that particular word comes up so that the reviewers can easily find that. Avoid template style Q&A. Please don't just put a heading and here's where we address that. Put a heading and here's where we address that. Or else we would have just given you a Q&A as an application. And one little helpful hint for this and just about any federal grant application or any grant application that you're writing: use your see alsos. Reference your attachments at other places in the application as often as possible. Deliverables are tied to milestones in the schedule, which is in attachment 5. See also the budget narrative. One of my favorite last sentences is, for additional information about blank, see blank. That tells them we've covered it in more places than one, and it also takes advantage of that lazy reviewer that may or may not flip to that page to see that you actually did provide that. Use the bold for key items. Don't bury the evidence. If you're citing a regulation showing a benefit stream or calling out a required deliverable, make it visually stand out. Use pictures and maps, site photos, aerial images. You cannot use too many of those. You want them to see the problem and the solution without having to wade through a bunch of jargon and what my supervisor likes to call word soup. And the last point of note: as often as possible, tie the content back to the scoring criteria by using those words that are listed in the criteria. Attachment 4, that budget narrative, should not just say what it costs. It should prove that every dollar is necessary, reasonable, and eligible, and tied to a deliverable. Speaking of that timeline, you want to aim at January of 2028, which gives FEMA about 2 years to review and approve these projects and come back with any RFIs. So our target for both your schedule and your budget is January of 2028. Now, the first part of that, your budget summary, is a brief summary, and it breaks things down to the same exact categories that they are broken into in the 424 line items. So the majority of your project's going to be in contractual, I would assume, but you'll see there those, and if you take a look at a 424, you'll see what those are broken into, and that's what you're going to do in your budget summary table. Then it's just a higher level one. You want to include the total project cost line broken into federal share and non-federal share. Of course, North Carolina's picking up that non-federal share for HMGP. In case you didn't catch that, North Carolina is paying the local match for HMGP. That's a big perk here for participating in this program. It might be slow, but it's 100%. Then go into the detailed line items that break things down even farther, which is so important. Show how you derived each one of those costs with a maximum allowable contingency of 5%. It's going to come back to you from the state review if you include a contingency line item that is greater than 5%. Speaking of 5%, do include your 5% subrecipient management costs, but show it as a separate line item so that it's not a part of the 75-25 cost share calculation. That 5% subrecipient management cost line item is paid 100% by FEMA. Don't include subrecipient management costs in the total project cost line item. Describe what they'll cover: the procurement documentation, the progress reporting, the financial tracking, the closeout support. One thing I like to do is just go in the eligible costs that are available for subrecipient management costs and cast myself a big net by listing all of those. We may use subrecipient management costs for all of these. I'm not saying you have to do that, but it does leave a lot of flexibility in what you use your subrecipient management cost for. All of the eligible cost items that are listed in the notice of funding opportunity. The third part is your narrative justification for each one of those line items. Take a look at those examples here on the screen. You want to link your narrative explanations directly to the scope of work tasks so that the reviewers can easily find and see that attachment. And if you want to be fancy, consider using a screenshot of each budget line item from that budget ahead of each item's justification. I think it really helps to guide the reviewer to each section. How it ties to the deliverable and the schedule. Explicitly connect budget lines to the deliverables and the schedule milestone. This makes it easy again for FEMA to see that the costs are tied to real outputs and not just placeholders. Section 4 specifically addresses your cost reasonability, shows that the costs are competitive and defensible and not inflated. Section 5 is likely to look the same in everyone's application. That's where you talk about your cost share and funding, which of course that cost share is coming from the state. If you're leveraging another grant, this is where you're going to talk about that, where some other funding sources come from, although that may have been discouraged in the development process as you've been talking to us. The concern there is the periods of performance between those two grants. You know, we've got that 2-year wait, and that's probably an optimistic timeline for when these are going to be approved. FEMA does not allow you to start any ground disturbance until theirs is completely funded. And you may have another grant that is expecting you to finish that within the next 2 years. So that's a direct conflict. So if this one's paying 100%, you might not want to use another grant to leverage a part of it. But if you do, that's where you'll talk about that. And be sure to wave the flag at the pre-award costs, talk about them and what they're going to be used for, flag them clearly in both the budget table and the narrative. And remember that pre-award costs can only go back as far as the declaration date for 4827, which was September 28th of 2024. And if you have any ineligible costs that have been purposely omitted from this, be sure to point that out. And be sure to point out that all of these are indeed eligible items. This is where you would talk about that. It just assures FEMA that you have understood the rules and what is eligible under HMGP. And here's that screenshot opportunity for the fourth attachment. Attachment 5 is the when and the who of your application. This is your schedule and your implementation measures where you are going to prove that the project is well planned, realistic, and measurable, and every milestone produces a tangible deliverable that your project manager and FEMA can check off. You're looking to inspire confidence that the project can be successfully implemented at the local level on time and within the approved budget and schedule. So starting with the first item, the project timeline, this is just a high-level narrative that the project is expected to begin within 3 months of the award and will be completed within that 48th month period of performance that I outlined for you earlier. You'll confirm that that period of performance for your schedule is 48 months or less. You can do that in a chart. I highly encourage you to do that in a chart. A Gantt chart or a flow diagram are going to help you to make it easy for the reviewer to understand what your schedule is, and then go into your implementation measures. This is about how the applicant will measure progress. Then you're going to talk about any scheduling dependencies that you might have. If you're waiting on permitting and you have allowed for time for that lengthy permitting process, be sure to include that. And this is the section of the narrative that you're going to speak specifically to that. Then talk about your completion criteria. Tell them exactly what complete looks like. Tie each of the milestones back to the scope of work and the budget item. And that is it for section 5. There is your outline for what the schedule and implementation measures attachment is going to look like for your infrastructure application. So then we'll turn the page on the who and the when, and we'll go to the where and the how, the EHP attachment. That should demonstrate that the applicant has thought through the where and the how of the construction and how it will occur, and provided clear maps and photos identifying potential permits and sensitive resources, and acknowledged FEMA's approval process before the work begins. This attachment needs to demonstrate that the applicant has provided enough visual and narrative details for FEMA to perform an EHP review. That's the environmental and historic preservation, while also bundling in the required federal and state assurances, which we provide you a template for. This starts with a brief 1 or 2 paragraph introduction that does go through the where and the how. You're going to just basically tell them here what work is being performed, where it's going to occur, and talk about any staging or laydown areas that are needed. It should not be the same as the executive summary in the scope of work attachment. Then you're going to move into a very visual section of your application, probably no narrative at all. This is where you include your maps. This is more maps than you've included in the previous section. This is your topographic map. This is your firm panel map. This is your aerial photo with staging areas highlighted there. Service area map, if applicable, for utilities. And yes, you did provide some of these maps already, but you're going to do it again here because this is the one that's specifically addressing the where and the how, or the environmental and historic preservation. You're going to talk about your ground disturbance description and be very, very technical here. We get a lot of RFIs that need you to go back and talk about the specific depth, width, and length of the excavation that is happening, whether that disturbance is in previously disturbed land versus undisturbed areas, any vegetation clearing that's required. As many of you may already know, the environmental review is what burns up a lot of the time in this review process. So take this 4th part of your outline and address each one of the coordinations that's going to be required. You don't have to reach out and actually make those coordinations, but talk about what might be found by each one of those coordinations. And how do you know? Well, there's an EHP checklist that's available on our website that goes by project type. Use that checklist and allow plenty of time for completing this section, because that checklist does have a lot of questions. You're going to want to do a Q&A format here. Remember, I talked to you about not doing the Q&A on the other one. This EHP section is very much a Q&A. Copy what is on that EHP spreadsheet, that EHP checklist for this specific project type, and then answer that question. And do that in this section. It's going to talk about these federal and North Carolina agencies, federal and state agencies that you have to coordinate with. But do remember that you don't actually have to do that coordination. FEMA's going to guide that throughout this process. Again, this section could take you a bit of time, so start early on that. Your photographs probably won't take you as much time, but that is color photographs of the site and surrounding area, at least 4 different angles, north, south, east, and west. Include aerial and drone shots if you have them. Then you're going to move into your permitting section. You're going to list any anticipated permits through 404 or 401, state water quality, floodplain development, your local building permits, that type of thing. If permits have been initiated or obtained, you can attach documentation here, or just provide an estimated timeline for outstanding permits that have not been. Don't worry about it. Remember, don't think that everything must be permitted at the time of the application. It does not. That is not a part of our shovel-ready definition. And then just copy and paste this compliance acknowledgement into your application as the next section in your attachment 6. Just a quick tip, keep this narrative section concise. It's more visual. Let those visuals, the photos, the maps, do your heavy lifting on attachment 6. Final section is the assurances package. We make this easy for you. It's all listed on our website. You can just download it and fill it out and sign it. That's all of what is going to be required to you as far as assurances and documents. And there's your outline for the final attachment for your infrastructure application. And I want to take this opportunity to point out that if there's any breaking news throughout this process or updates to our deadlines or something that's shared with you in this webinar, take a look at the notes in the YouTube section underneath this video. We'll provide any additional clarity or updates in that notes section of the application. I'll also put time signatures that will allow you to move to specific parts of this application without having to watch the entire thing again. You can just click that time signature and take you right to the information that you are looking for. And at the end, right before you get ready to put them into Salesforce, I'd like to give you my top 3 tips of what I would do to get those ready to do a final pass to make sure that they are nice and competitive and complete. Review your final submission against the scoring criteria and prompts. This is a really good AI exercise. I would put that attachment in my ChatGPT and run it against the scoring prompts and see if it has any suggestions about how you might wave the flag at the reviewer to be sure you're not missing any of those scoring terms. Also, you'll want to check for internal consistency. Make sure that the project title, the cost, and the timeline matches across all forms and attachments. And finally, find opportunities for cross-referencing. This is where I want you to put your see alsos. For more information about blank, see the blank attachment. Then your frequently asked questions, just a few that continue to come up throughout the emailing process. No physical work may occur prior to the grant award. It will disqualify the grant. So that is very important for you to know. Is a BCA required for all projects, for all construction projects? Yes, I think initially they were saying that there was a threshold of $1 million, but I think that's gone away. So plan on having a BCA for all construction projects. Of course, the 5% initiative project, only a BCA narrative is needed at the time of submission, and for the 7% planning projects, neither a BCA narrative nor a full BCA are required. Is technical assistance available from the state? Now, we do provide statewide training and guidance and answer individual questions, but cannot write local sub-applications just due to the volume and the small staff that we have here in the hazard mitigation section development. But a statewide review panel is going to be convened and will review your first draft of your application and provide very important feedback that I would call technical assistance. In fact, when you're reaching out to me to ask questions throughout this process, please let me know that you've watched this video. You'll notice that this is pretty common in all of the webinars that I've posted for this agency. Your password here is Boone. If you start that conversation by telling me that you've watched the training video, that is extra star from the teacher here, because nothing's worse than you asking me a bunch of questions that indicates that you haven't watched the succinct material that is available for you on the website. You can reach out anytime to my supervisor, jason.pleasant@ncdps.gov, or me, and we will answer your questions in quick time. Thank you so much for tuning in today. These next few slides will be provided to you in silence. Those are the ones that just review the outline of the 6 required attachments. Good luck. Let me know if I can help you along the way.